The wind cut against my face as I ran down the narrow alley, my pistol gripped tight in my hand, each step echoing like a drum inside my head. The siren was already far behind. Now there was only the sound of my own breathing and the distant rattle of chains hitting rusted metal. I turned the corner and felt the world stop. The dry click of a trigger echoed in the dark, and before I could react, something hard slammed into my temple. The light went out. When my vision returned, I was tied to a chair, the skin on my face throbbing, and in front of me, him, the man I had hunted for months, the same man I'd put behind bars 7 years ago, the same cold stare, the same unnerving calm. Only now, it was just the two of us. And I didn't know if I was getting out of that room alive. I was born and raised in a small town in rural North Carolina, where everyone knew each other's names and pasts. My father was sheriff for 30 years, and he taught me that the badge isn't just a uniform. It's a weight you carry in your soul. He used to say that true courage isn't facing danger, but making hard decisions when no one's watching. I grew up watching those decisions happen right there in our kitchen, while he cleaned his gun at the table, and my mother looked at him in silence, wearing that mix of pride and worry only someone who loves a cop can understand. When he died, I was 22, fresh out of the academy, and I promised myself I would honor every step he'd taken, even if it meant losing pieces of myself along the way. I'm not the kind of cop who smiles in department photos. The street changes you, and every year I feel my expression grow heavier. I've seen more bodies than I care to remember, looked into the eyes of mothers who will never be the same, and I've pulled the trigger when there was no other choice. I carry on my shoulder the scar from a bullet that almost took me out, and in my mind, scars that don't bleed but never fully heal. It's like every call leaves. Behind an invisible weight you learn to carry in silence, because admitting you're breaking can be dangerous in a world where hesitation can mean dying. 7 years ago, my life changed in a way I wasn't ready for. I was working an operation against a group that controlled trafficking and extortion across 3 counties. One of their leaders was smart, meticulous, and absolutely ruthless. Marcus Kane. He wasn't a common criminal. He planned every move like a chess game, and I knew that if I didn't take him down, more people would die. It took months of investigation, sleepless nights chasing barely visible leads. When I finally caught him, it felt like closing a chapter, but also like lighting a match in a room full of gasoline. The way he looked at me when we cuffed him, it stayed burned in my mind. There was no rage, no fear, just a silent promise that this moment wouldn't be the end. Since then, I've never let my guard down. I changed cities, changed my routines, but the memory of that look was always there, like a shadow that never leaves, even in broad daylight. I've worked kidnapping cases, human trafficking, homicides, always keeping a safe emotional distance, or at least trying. But the truth is, each case that digs deeper into you chips away at the armor you've built. And I knew that sooner or later something would happen to test how much I could take. I don't have close family. My work is my home. My gun is my most loyal partner, and the radio is the voice that keeps me company through the long nights. Some say I'm obsessed. I call it commitment. I learned early that in this world, distraction kills. That's why I've kept my personal life locked away. No openings, no ties that could be used against me. Until fate, cruel and ironic, decided to put in front of me the one person I never wanted to see again. And when I realized I was face to face with Marcus Kane again, trapped with him, no backup, no way out, I knew this wasn't just another case. It was the reckoning he'd promised me years ago, and maybe the last one of my career. The day started like so many others. Gray skies, cold coffee, overdue reports, and the nagging feeling that something was about to go wrong. I was at my desk reviewing a warrant when the radio crackled, slicing through the room's stale air. The dispatcher's voice came through steady, but with an undertone I couldn't ignore, as if someone was whispering just behind the microphone. Unit 321, possible hostage situation in an abandoned warehouse in the industrial zone. Anonymous tip, suspicious activity, multiple entry points, no visual confirmation. I jotted down the address, but before I could respond, Another transmission cut in, a voice slipping onto the frequency like a breath down my neck. "You owe me a visit, detective." The silence that followed was heavier than any siren. This wasn't protocol. This wasn't an accident. This was an invitation. I requested backup, but dispatch was swamped with an active, shooter across town. They promised a unit if one freed up, promised to call back. I could wait. I should wait. But the tip had details no random caller would know. The cracked steel door on the east side, the exterior staircase with 3 broken steps, the faint smell of chlorine, just like we'd found in Marcus's old hideouts years ago. His name wasn't spoken, but it was written into every word. That kind of precision wasn't coincidence. It was a signature. On the way there, my phone buzzed with a blocked number. I answered. The car still in gear, seatbelt tight across my chest. The voice was metallic, distorted by some cheap app, but the rhythm of the pauses, I'd know it anywhere. 7 years, detective. Today the debt comes due. I checked the rear view like I could rip the pass right out of the back seat. Before I could respond, the line went dead. No GPS trace, no callback. The kind of message designed to knock you off balance and push you exactly where they want you. And it worked. I was already on my way. The industrial zone was a skeleton of a dead city. Crooked signs, warehouses with missing panels, train tracks leading nowhere. The wind carried a metallic tang, a mix of rust and old rain. As I got closer, a memory cut through like high beams in the dark. The day I arrested Marcus, the flash of cameras hitting my face, the cuffs biting into his wrists, and that unhurried look, like a predator studying the clock. I never forgot, and he knew it. I fired off a short text to my partner, Jax. "Checking tip at 12th and River, Industrial Zone. If you can, roll in." 2 blue ticks, no reply. Could be 5 minutes, could be 20. On the scanner, chatter overlapped in code. Nothing about me, nothing about him. Just a hole of silence the size of my name. I parked 2 blocks out, avoiding direct line of sight. From here, I could see the warehouse's roof. Boarded windows, a jagged tooth missing from the ridge, the shadow of a smokestack cutting the sky. Fresh tire tracks. Dented the wet asphalt, deep curves from something heavy. A pickup had been here recently. Instinct told me there were people inside, but no music, no laughter, no footsteps, just an electrical hum, rising and falling like a machine breathing. In the passenger seat, a photo slipped from a case file and landed in my lap. A yellow police line, a covered body. My father, still alive then, looking at me with the same question he asked me every morning. "How much are you willing to pay?" I folded it, without ceremony. The price was already paid. I just didn't know the interest rate. I moved in slow, feeling the vest cling to my shirt. I tested the radio in a whisper. 321 approaching perimeter. No visual. Awaiting backup. Static. Again, nothing. Then a crackle like nails on vinyl before a voice came through, clear and sharp. Not brave enough to come in alone? It wasn't the radio. It was a loudspeaker somewhere inside, buried in the dark. I scanned east and spotted it, almost invisible. A tiny camera aimed at the street. They knew I was here. They were watching, and they wanted me to know it. Nobody sends an invitation like this without the table already set. And then I caught it. The smell. Chlorine. Stronger now, riding the wind, dragging memories of chained captives straight into my lungs. The anonymous tip, the voice on the line, the camera, the smell. It wasn't a clue. It was a polite trap. I should have turned around, set a perimeter, waited for backup, followed the book. Instead, I counted to 3, pocketed my phone, checked my grip, and slipped into the shadows. Because sometimes the book doesn't arrive in time. And sometimes the only thing standing between a monster and someone they love is the fool who decides to go in first. I was that fool, and I took the first step. The narrow street leading to the warehouse seemed to swallow the daylight. The asphalt was cracked, with fissures wide enough to catch the tip of my boot, and the buildings on either side leaned forward as if they were trying to hide whatever was about to happen inside. Every step came with the distant sound of water dripping from some rusted gutter, and the air carried that sharp metallic scent of wet steel, laced with the faint tang of burnt oil. The light drizzle starting to fall didn't wash anything clean, It only made the place feel more like it had been dead for a long time. The warehouse loomed ahead like a silent animal, built of stained concrete and rusted steel. The high windows, boarded with metal sheets, leaked thin slits of yellow light that flickered like old bulbs ready to burn out. A side gate, thick steel, bore fresh scratch marks, not the kind time leaves behind. Someone had tried to get in or out in a hurry. Every second I stood there observing, I felt the weight of my decision pressing down. I stayed in the shadow of a neighboring building, watching. There were no voices, no machinery sounds, but the silence wasn't natural. It was the kind of silence that screams, the kind that warns you something is wrong. The only noise was a steady hum, maybe from a hidden generator, and every so often, the dull clang of metal, like a gate being touched, by the wind, or by someone making sure I knew they were there. I scanned the east side. It matched the tip exactly. The cracked steel door with its jagged, half-healed scar of a gap, the external iron staircase with broken steps and a bent handrail. On the third step, a dark stain. Maybe oil, maybe dried blood. I didn't need to touch it to know it was fresh. The smell of chlorine hit me again, stronger now, drifting out from inside, carrying the chemical memory of old crime scenes straight into my lungs. I moved closer, my hand firm on the grip of my gun, senses wired tight. Each step changed the texture under my boots, from rough asphalt to uneven concrete, then to a fine layer of dust, like no one had passed in years, except the boot prints said otherwise. Heavy prints from industrial, work boots, lighter ones from sneakers, all leading in, fresh. My hand brushed against the cold wall, feeling the coarse, peeling paint. Small flakes broke off and hit the ground with a sound too loud for this silence. My gut twisted. This was the moment any sane cop would call in reinforcements and wait. But I was already in too deep, and something inside told me that if I waited, I'd lose my only shot at finding out what was really going on. I stopped in front of the cracked door, studying the lock. Not broken, but clearly opened and shut multiple times tonight. I pressed my ear to the cold metal. Nothing. No footsteps. No voices. Just a heavy stillness, as if the air inside was trapped, waiting for me to let it out. It felt like the whole building was breathing with me, slow and heavy. I scanned the street one more time. Empty, except for a thin, hungry cat slipping between shadows, vanishing under an abandoned car. On the corner, a security camera faced the wrong way, useless for what was about to happen. It was like the whole setting had been chosen to isolate me, to make sure nothing here leaked out into the world. I crouched to check the base of the door and spotted it, a thin trickle of dirty water running out, tinged yellow. The chlorine smell was even stronger there, sharp enough to burn my nose. This wasn't cleaning. This was covering something up, something that had happened inside, and not long ago. When my hand gripped the cold handle, my heartbeat spiked, like it was about to fire before the trigger was even pulled. There was no turning back. Either I walked in and faced what was behind that door, or I went home and carried the doubt for the rest of my life. I chose the first. But before I could push, a light flared from behind the crack on the side. A shadow moved inside, slow, deliberate, like it knew I was watching. And then, a low, deep voice came from within, clear enough to make me lean in to catch it. "You took your time, detective. I was starting to get bored." I shoved the door open with my shoulder, feeling the metal vibrate under my weight, and it swung wide with a long, almost theatrical creak. The dim yellow light of weak bulbs revealed a narrow corridor, bare concrete walls stained with damp. The chlorine smell was now almost suffocating, laced with something else, metallic, dense and all too familiar, blood. The air inside was heavy, as if every molecule had soaked up years of secrets and violence. I took 2 steps in, and the door slammed shut behind me with a metallic bang that echoed through the space. Instinct made me spin fast, gun ready, but no one was there, or no one I could see. I kept moving down the corridor, each step clapping against the cement floor, the generator's hum growing louder. Somewhere ahead, a bulb flickered, casting shadows that danced along the walls like figures retreating from my gaze. The hall opened into a wide room, and I realized the place had been set up carefully. Not messy, like an improvised hideout. Everything had been placed deliberately. Stacks of crates formed natural barriers, some draped in black tarps, creating blind spots. At the far end, a metal chair lay on its side, its legs bent like it had been knocked over violently. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Light, deliberate, circling between the crates, changing direction as if to throw me off. A voice followed, echoing from multiple points at once, as though it were coming from hidden speakers. "You know, Detective, I've thought a lot about this moment." A long, measured pause, every syllable calculated. "And I think you have too." I kept my gun steady, eyes sweeping the space. I knew I shouldn't answer, but the words slipped out. "Show your face, Kane." A low chuckle answered, reverberating through the air. Not nervous, not mocking, the laugh of a man who already knows he's winning. I moved along the side, using the stacked crates for cover. As I advanced, I noticed drag marks on the floor. Something, or someone, had been pulled across and disappeared behind one of the barriers. Suddenly, a metallic clatter to my right made me pivot. A chain fell from somewhere above, hitting the floor with a sharp clang. Before I could check, I felt the impact, a hard shove between my shoulders, sending me sprawling to the rough ground. My gun slipped from my grip, sliding several feet away. I rolled instinctively, expecting a second hit, but it didn't come. By the time I got up, the gun was gone. His voice came again, closer this time, almost right behind me. "Funny, 7 years ago, you walked into my house uninvited. Today, I make you walk into mine." Footsteps echoed around me, but I couldn't lock onto a direction. The space itself seemed to twist the sound, tossing it from side to side. My fists clenched as I forced my breathing steady. I knew he was hurting me toward a specific point, but every nerve in my body screamed that the only way out was forward. I turned the corner of a crate barricade and froze. On the floor, chained to a low beam, was a man unconscious, mouth sealed with duct tape, hands bound with heavy chains. His face was swollen, bruised, with dried blood streaking from his brow. I crouched to check his pulse. Faint, but there. That's when I heard it. The cold, unmistakable click of a gun being cocked. The barrel pressed against the side of my head, icy and precise. "Step away from him, detective." The voice was real now. No speakers, no echo. He was here, in the flesh, breathing against my ear. Slowly, I raised my hands, keeping my eyes on the man bound at my feet. Fighting here was suicide. Every second, I could feel the control slipping further from me. Then Kane leaned in close, his voice dropping to a whisper sharp enough to cut. "Tonight, both of us are leaving here, but only one of us will be walking out." He forced me to stand slowly, the gun barrel pressed to my temple like a constant reminder of who was in charge. I could smell him, sweat, leather, and that same cheap cologne he wore the night I arrested him years ago. Marcus shoved me forward, making me walk across the open space until we rounded a tall stack of crates covered in black tarps. That's when the world seemed to shrink around me. The room opened into a darker area, lit only by a single dangling bulb that swayed gently. In the center was a row of metal chairs, each one occupied. 4 people, bound, gagged. Their wrists were raw from thick rope, their skin glistening with sweat, eyes wide with terror. But it wasn't the number of them that froze me. It was the face slumped forward in the third chair. My partner, Jax. My heart pounded so hard I thought Marcus might hear it. I hadn't heard back from my message earlier, and now I knew why. His face was swollen, bruised, a fresh gash above his eyebrow. He lifted his head sluggishly, and even through the gag, I could see the recognition, the shock, the anger, and most of all, concern. Marcus caught it immediately and smiled, slow and venomous. "Ah, so you two know each other. Even better." He stepped forward, pulling the gun from my head but keeping me in his sights. "You see, Detective, when I said I'd been waiting for this moment for 7 years, I wasn't kidding. I planned every detail. Every person here is here for a reason. I scanned the other hostages and realized there was a pattern. The woman in the first chair, I'd seen her before. A witness in a kidnapping case I'd closed. The man in the second, an informant who'd worked with me during the operation against Marcus's crew. And the fourth, a teenager, no older than 17, but with the same eyes as a boy I'd pulled from Marcus's grasp years ago, when he was just a lost kid in the middle of the chaos. Marcus hadn't just lured me here. He'd gathered pieces of my past, arranging them like a mosaic of everything I'd touched. "You think you're the hero in these stories," Marcus said, pacing slowly in a circle around me. "But every time you saved someone, you took something from me. And now, I'm giving it back." The bulb swung above us, throwing jagged shadows on the walls, each sway ticking like a clock I couldn't see. My stomach churned, not just from the danger, but from the cold precision it had taken to bring me here. He knew I'd come alone. He knew the fake tip would make me act without backup. And he knew using people from my past would disarm me from the inside out. Jack shifted in his chair, maybe to signal something, but Marcus noticed and cracked him across the side of the head with the gun's grip. The dull thud echoed in the room. I stepped forward without thinking, my jaw locked tight. Touch him again and "You'll what, detective? Arrest me?" He spread his arms, almost offering himself. "Play out the same story again? I'm not here to run, I'm here to finish it." That's when he pulled something from his pocket. A phone. He turned the screen toward me and hit play. It was grainy. Security footage from an old jail cell. And there he was, 7 years younger, sitting on the bench, staring at me as I shut the door. But the video didn't stop there. It showed another man in uniform entering the cell, leaning in to whisper something, handing Marcus a folded piece of paper. There was no audio, but I didn't need it. I understood exactly what I was seeing. Someone inside the system had helped him. My head spun. His prison sentence hadn't been the end. It had been the start of a game I didn't even know I was playing. Worse, someone I'd trusted had been on his side from the very beginning. Marcus leaned in, close enough for me to feel his breath. "You never caught the real enemy, detective." He smiled, tapping the phone. "He's closer than you think." I looked at Jax, and for a fleeting moment, I saw something in his eyes that took the air out of my lungs. It wasn't just pain, it was guilt. Jax's look hit me like a point-blank shot. At first, I tried to rationalize. Maybe it was just the pain, the fear, the situation. But there was something else there. Something that couldn't be explained by bruises or shock. A tension in his eyes. A hesitation I had never seen before. I'd known Jax for 6 years. He was my partner, my brother in uniform, the only one who understood the weight of certain decisions without needing words. We'd been through shootouts, chases, endless stakeouts, and in all of it, I'd trusted him with my life. But now, a crack had opened. Inside me, and no matter how much I wanted to ignore it, I couldn't. Marcus's words echoed like poison in my head. "He's closer than you think." I wanted to believe it was just manipulation, Kane playing his usual game, planting seeds of doubt to weaken me. That was his tactic, always had been. But the memory of that video, the clarity of that scene, the uniform stepping into the cell, the way the man leaned in to pass that paper, it was familiar, too familiar. And no matter how hard I fought it, the silhouette reminded me of someone I knew. My pulse pounded, not just from the danger, but from the weight of the possibility. What if it was true? What if, all these years, I'd been working side by side with someone who had a pact with the very man we were hunting? For a cop, betrayal is deadlier than any bullet. It doesn't just kill trust, it shatters the meaning of the job, the backbone of the mission. Everything you stand for suddenly feels fragile, hollow. I fought to keep my face steady, but inside, I was torn between 3 forces: the instinct to survive, the drive to protect the hostages, and the almost obsessive need to know the truth. But to get that truth, I'd have to give Marcus what he wanted: me, exposed and unstable. As he circled like a predator, my breathing grew heavier. My hands tingled with the heat of anger, but also with doubt. I looked at Jax again, searching for some sign, some unspoken message. He broke eye contact, and that gutted me. Jax never looked away. He always held my gaze, even under pressure. That break felt as telling as any piece of hard evidence. Then a memory cut through me. 2 years ago, sitting in the car with Jax after a brutal bust, when we found an informant dead before he could testify against a crew tied to Marcus. I'd said it all felt too quick to be coincidence, and Jax had just muttered, "Yeah, it happens," flat, without the anger I expected. Back then, I chalked it up to exhaustion. Now, it played back in my mind like a blade twisting. For a moment, I thought about acting right then. Lunging at Marcus, taking him down, ending it. But the math was instant. I was unarmed, surrounded, with 4 vulnerable hostages and a man who could kill me before I closed the distance. Anger without strategy was worthless. And part of me wanted to wait, to see how far Marcus would take this story, to rip the truth out of him at the perfect moment. The problem is, in moments like these, the perfect moment is as slippery as blood on the floor. 1 second too late and you lose everything. And I could feel I was already on that edge, dangerously close to losing it all. Not just my life, but the line between who I am and who I might become. I was trapped in a choice that was eating me alive. If I saved Jax along with the others and he was guilty, I'd be setting a traitor free to keep destroying from the inside. But if I believed Marcus and abandoned him, I could be making the worst mistake of my career. And through it all, Marcus fed on my doubt like it was oxygen. I closed my eyes for a heartbeat, trying to hear only my own pulse, shutting out his voice. I felt the sweat slide down my neck, the tension in my jaw, the ache in my shoulders. I opened them again with one resolve, to deny Marcus the satisfaction of seeing my uncertainty. But deep down, the crack was there, and I knew that whatever decision I made in that room, it would haunt me for the rest of my life. Maybe that was his real plan. All along, not just to kill me, but to leave me alive, long enough to carry that doubt to the grave. Marcus stopped in front of me, close enough that I could see the damp glint in his eyes, the kind of look that doesn't come from pure hate, but from anticipation. He knew he was in control, and the silence that followed was worse than any threat. The imagined tick-tock of that swaying bulb over the hostages' heads kept time with my own pulse, each beat faster than the last. He wanted me to choose, and he knew that no matter what I chose, I'd walk out of here broken. "Let's make this easy, detective," he said, lifting the phone again. The screen showed a countdown, 5 minutes. When this hits 0, someone here dies. You decide who. It felt like the floor dropped out beneath me. My first instinct was to look for a loophole. Maybe it was a bluff, maybe the timer meant nothing, but his eyes didn't lie. Marcus wasn't the kind of man to use time as an empty threat. He honored deadlines. I knew that. I looked at the 4 hostages. The woman, terrified, breathing so fast she seemed on the verge of fainting. The man beside her kept his eyes closed, maybe praying. The boy trembled, fists clenched. And Jax stared at me now, locking onto me as if trying to burn through my skin, telling me something words couldn't. I couldn't tell if it was a plea for help or a warning. My mind raced like a chessboard on fast forward. If I went for Marcus without a weapon, the odds of catching a Palazzo bullet before I got to him were high. Even if I succeeded, there could be hidden backup waiting in the shadows. If I stalled for time, it might look like weakness and push him to act sooner. The radio on my hip was still silent, as if the rest of the world had been erased. The only things alive in here were the hostages breathing and that damn ticking clock on the phone. 4 minutes. Marcus began pacing, slow and deliberate, behind each hostage. His free hand slid along their shoulders like he was inspecting merchandise. I could decide on my own, but where's the fun in that? He said with a smirk. I want you to live knowing you picked who stays and who doesn't. It was the perfect trap. No matter what I did, the guilt would be mine. The only way to break it was to change the game entirely. But how? My eyes swept the room for anything I could use to turn the tables. And then I saw it. The chain I'd noticed earlier, the one binding the unconscious man, was now lying loose, on the floor, the end within arm's reach. The plan sparked instantly. If I could distract Marcus for just 2 seconds, I could whip the chain around his gun arm, disarm him, and bring him down. It was risky. If I missed, everyone here could die faster. But it was the only play I had. 3 minutes. I glanced at Jax, and this time, he understood. He shifted his foot, dragging his boot across the floor to create a scraping noise that echoed in the room. Marcus turned toward him, irritation flashing in his eyes. That was my moment. I shifted my weight like I was just adjusting my stance, and in one quick motion grabbed the chain and hurled it toward his gun arm. The metal wrapped around his wrist, and I yanked with everything I had. The gun went off, the shot deafening, the bullet ricocheting off the wall behind us. The hostages flinched, muffled screams caught behind their gags. I used the momentum to slam into him, shoulder to chest, trying to drive him down. But Marcus was fast. He rolled with the hit, his elbow slamming into my ribs and knocking the wind out of me. The chain was still locked around his arm, and I refused to let go. The struggle was short and brutal. We hit the floor hard, the gun skittering across the concrete. 2 minutes. I knew I wouldn't reach the weapon before he did, so I threw my weight on him, pinning his free arm with my knee, using the chain to lock the other down. Sweat burned my eyes, the chlorine and blood stinging my nose. "You're not the one calling the shots here," I snarled. He just smiled beneath me, glancing toward the phone lying nearby. The timer still ran. "Oh, detective, you think that changes anything?" A sharp beep cut through the air, and that's when I realized the phone didn't control anything. It was just a clock. The real trigger was somewhere else. 1 minute. The timer hit 0. The shrill beep sounded 3 times, each one slicing through the air like a slow-motion death knell. For a second, the whole world seemed to hold its breath. I was still on top of Marcus, my weight pinning him to the floor, the chain tight around the arm that had held the gun. Then I heard it, a sharp mechanical click somewhere above us. My instincts screamed before my brain caught up, a remote trigger. I twisted my head and spotted it hanging from the ceiling beams, a small cylindrical device, barely visible in the shadows. A red light blinked on its side just as it began to fade. I didn't think. I dove to the side, releasing Marcus for only a split second, and threw myself over the boy in the last chair. The explosion wasn't the cinematic kind. No thunderous boom, no fireball, just a controlled detonation, the kind I'd seen in improvised traps. The blast ripped a section of concrete from the side wall, spraying dust and debris across the room. The acrid smell of gunpowder mixed with the chlorine and blood already thick in the air. Muffled cries erupted from the hostages, chairs scraping as some of them tried to shield themselves despite their restraints. The woman in the first chair had taken shrapnel to her leg, her pant leg torn, dark red staining the fabric. I pushed myself up, ears ringing, and scanned the room. Marcus was already on his feet, coughing through the dust, eyes narrowed against the haze. In the chaos, he bolted toward the far side of the warehouse, disappearing behind a wall of crates. I started after him, but froze when I heard the sharp, pained groan of the injured woman. Every instinct in me screamed to chase him, but the part that knew the job, the part that couldn't leave people behind, kept me rooted. I moved to her first, pulling my knife from my pocket to cut the ropes at her wrists. I tore a strip from my own shirt and tied it tight above the wound. "Stay with me. Breathe. Don't look down." I kept my voice firm, steady, even though my pulse was racing. Jax was already straining against his restraints, eyes locked on me. For a moment, I thought he'd call out. Something. Anything. But he stayed silent. Then I heard it. Hurried footsteps echoing from deep inside the warehouse. Marcus was on the move. I snatched up the pistol lying near the debris and aimed toward the sound, edging toward the crates. Before I could move in, a sharp crash echoed from the shadows, a heavy chain hitting the floor. I turned and saw the unconscious man from earlier, now free of his bonds but collapsed, too weak to stand. The radio on my hip crackled for the first time all night. Unit 321, backup inbound. 2 minutes to perimeter. 2 minutes. It might as well have been 2 hours. Marcus could vanish in 30 seconds if he found the right exit. I had to decide, go after him now and risk walking into another trap, or stay and secure the hostages until backup arrived. The boy I'd shielded earlier was still trembling. Through the gag, he mumbled something. I leaned in, pulling the tape away, and his voice came out in a hoarse whisper. He said, "It's not just here." I swallowed hard. If Marcus had more than one location set up, if this was only part of the plan, then the blast we'd just survived was just a preview. Outside, tires screeched on wet asphalt. Doors slammed, voices barked orders, the cavalry finally arriving. But I knew, just like Marcus knew, that the advantage had shifted. He'd walked out of here alive. And worse, he'd left me with more questions than answers. And Jax still hadn't said a word. The sound of the approaching sirens echoed, outside. But inside, amid the floating dust and sharp chemical smell, it felt like the world had shrunk to a tense, suffocating silence, broken only by the heavy breathing of the hostages and the pounding in my chest. I stepped toward Jax, knife in hand, to cut his restraints. But before I could touch them, he spoke. His voice muffled by the tape, yet clear enough to freeze me in place. "It's not what you think." I paused, locking eyes with him. That wasn't a plea for help. It was a warning. I ripped the tape away in one swift motion, and he inhaled sharply, like he'd been holding it in for hours. "If you go after him now, you'll be doing exactly what he wants," he said, coughing, his face streaked with dried blood. "And what do you suggest?" I shot back, slicing through the rope at his wrists but keeping my gaze locked on his. "Wait until he sends us flowers?" Jax shook his head, his expression heavy. "You think I've never seen this game before?" He didn't start planning this. 7 years ago, Mike. It started earlier, and he wasn't alone. He took a breath, steadying himself. "I went undercover in his circle months after you put him away. It was the only way to track who was helping him from the inside." His words hit like a blow. The pieces began to fit together in a way I wasn't sure I wanted them to. "And you didn't tell me?" My voice came out low, almost a growl. "If I told you, the whole plan would have collapsed." He glanced toward the boy still, tied to the chair. "These four, they're not just victims. They're messages. Each one represents a mistake we made trying to take down the rest of his network. He wants you to see this as failure so you'll follow him blind." I glanced at the phone lying on the floor, the frozen 0 on its screen. The thought that the blast was only part of something bigger clawed at me. "Then tell me, Jax." I stepped closer, heat rising in my chest. "Do I trust you or not?" He didn't flinch. "You trust me. Enough to get out of here right now and not chase him. If we go now, he'll lead us straight into phase 2. And there won't be backup in time." Outside, car doors slammed. Boots pounded against wet pavement. Officers were flooding the building, but I was still stuck in that narrow space between loyalty and paranoia. Maybe Jax was telling the truth. Maybe he'd gone deep undercover and never told me to protect the op. Or maybe he was spinning this to cover a truth that only helped him. And "Marcus, if you're with me, prove it," I said, handing him the knife. "Cut the rest loose and walk out with them, no hesitation." He went to the injured woman first, freed her and helped her stand. Then the boy, then the older man. His movements were quick, efficient, no trembling, no reluctance. That only made it harder to read him. A traitor doesn't usually work that hard to save people they could just leave behind. 2 uniforms came toward us, guns raised. "Suspect?" one asked. I looked, toward the corridor where Marcus had vanished. I could tell them he was gone, or I could hold it back and hunt him my way. Before I could answer, Jax said, "He's still close, and he wants us to follow." The officer's eyes shifted to me, waiting for my call. And right then, I realized the conversation with Jax had changed more than I expected. This wasn't just about catching Marcus anymore. It was about deciding whether I'd act on anger or play this the way Marcus played everything. Slow, calculated, patient, and that choice would say more about who I was than any arrest I'd ever made. When the dust finally began to settle and the paramedics took over with the hostages, I stepped back a few paces, as if I needed air, but in truth, I just needed distance from everyone. The sirens outside, the crackle of the radio, the pounding of boots on concrete. None of it reached me. I was stuck inside my own head, replaying every detail, every glance, every word from that warehouse. Marcus had gotten away, and worse, he'd left with exactly what he wanted, my doubt. The conversation with Jax hadn't purged the poison Marcus had injected. It had spread it. Part of me wanted to believe his story about going undercover, about being embedded to dismantle the network from the inside. But another part, the darker part, reminded me of all the little coincidences, all the times Jax was in the right place, or the wrong one, at the exact right moment. In any other case, I would have connected the dots and treated it as collusion. But Jax wasn't any other case. He was my partner, my friend, the man who held my hand while I bled out on the asphalt years ago. As I looked around that warehouse, I realized Marcus had turned it into more than a physical trap. It was a stage. Every chair, every hostage, every tick of that timer, all designed to pit me against myself. And it had worked. I wasn't the same man who had walked through that cracked door. I had crossed an invisible line and was now stuck in the no man's land between trust and paranoia. Deep down, I understood that this was his real weapon. Not the gun, not the explosives, not his network of accomplices. It was his ability to carve cracks in people's minds, to turn friends into suspects and suspects into pawns in a larger game. That took a kind of coldness I always thought I was incapable of, until tonight, because the moment I considered that I might have to play by his rules to catch him, I realized I was already willing to go further than I ever had before, and that scared me. I remembered my father's words in the kitchen while cleaning his gun. The day you start looking too much like the men you hunt, son, is the day you hang up the badge. I'd always thought I knew exactly where that line was. Now I wasn't so sure. While the evidence techs moved through the scene and yellow tape went up around the perimeter, I felt the weight of what was coming. Marcus hadn't just escaped. He'd left me a promise, dressed up, as a challenge. And I knew he wouldn't strike again like a fugitive on the run. He'd force me to move on his terms, to look where he wanted, to question who he wanted me to. I rubbed my face, feeling the heat under my skin, the pounding in my temples. I'd hunted dangerous men before, but never one who knew me this well from the inside. That changed everything. The change in me wasn't instant, but I felt the seed planted. My way of investigating, of trusting, even of thinking, it was already shifting. From now on, I couldn't rely solely on instinct or protocol. I'd have to be meticulous, strategic, maybe even manipulative if I wanted to beat him, and that meant letting go of part of who I was. One of the officers called me over for a preliminary statement. I glanced across the room at Jax, who was speaking with two agents. He caught my stare, and for an instant there was something in his eyes I couldn't read. Guilt? Fatigue? Resolve? I didn't know. What I did know was that from now on, I'd be watching every step he took, not because I wanted to catch him, but because I couldn't give anyone the power to blindside me again. Marcus wanted me to choose between being a cop and being a hunter. I was starting to understand that to beat him, I might have to be both, and live with what that would cost me. The SWAT teams swept every corner of the warehouse, but it was already too late. Marcus had vanished like smoke in the wind. No useful trace left behind except for boot prints, tangled with older ones, and the stubborn chlorine stench clinging to every inch of the place. The makeshift explosives were too scorched to trace back to a source, and the camera I'd spotted at the entrance, wiped clean. He'd erased everything before I even pushed through that cracked door. While the paramedics worked, I watched each of the hostages being loaded into ambulances. The woman who'd taken shrapnel to the leg would need surgery, but she was conscious. The boy clung to one of the medics like the touch itself was a lifeline. The older man kept his head down, silent, while the last one, the informant, looked at me with a mix of gratitude and fear, as if he wasn't sure if I'd saved him or dragged him into something worse. I should have been with the crime scene techs, collecting evidence, taking notes. But my mind was locked on that timer, on the blast, on the way Marcus had steered every beat of the encounter to make me feel like I had the upper hand. only to rip it away at the exact moment he wanted. What cut deepest was knowing he could have killed me. Could have killed any of them with a single pull of the trigger. But he didn't. He didn't want to end anything. He wanted to keep it going. Over the radio, the perimeter commander reported all industrial zone exits blocked. I knew it wouldn't matter. Marcus knew this area better than anyone. He had underground routes, abandoned storage connections. People paid to open doors at the right moment, even if he was still. Nearby, he wouldn't be found unless he wanted to be. In my preliminary report, I kept it cold and clinical. Suspect fled. Multiple hostages recovered. Explosive detonated. No fatalities. On paper, it was a success. But the truth, the part that didn't make it onto the record, was that the operation had failed. I had failed. The man who should have been in cuffs was out there, armed, and still 2 steps ahead. I glanced at Jax, giving his statement to 2 detectives. He spoke calmly, measured, without slipping once. Exactly the way someone trained to stick to a story would sound. Part of me wanted to believe him. Another part wanted to grab him by the collar and demand answers right there. But I didn't. Because if he was telling the truth about being undercover, any wrong move from me could blow the whole thing and put lives in danger. And if he was lying, losing my temper would only give him and Marcus the upper hand. When the last vehicles pulled away, I lingered alone in the warehouse. The overturned chair, the marks from the ropes on the floor, the gunpowder still biting the air, it all screamed that this wasn't over. I pulled out my phone, scrolled to a number I'd almost dialed earlier, an old contact in the FBI who owed me a favor. I thought about calling him in to hunt Marcus now, but stopped. Not yet. I needed to understand exactly what game Marcus wanted me to play before I brought others into it. Outside, the sky was starting to lighten. The end of the night brought no relief, just the gnawing certainty that every minute of daylight was another minute Marcus would use to prepare his next move. I closed my eyes and saw his smile again, that unshakable calm only a man with a perfect plan could wear. As I walked out to my car, I made myself one promise. I would hunt him, but not the way I had before. No rushing in, no blind rage. I'd do it his way, meticulous, calculated, patient. I'd set the board and wait for him to make the next move, even if it cost me sleep, even if it forced me into choices I never thought I'd make. In the rearview mirror, the warehouse shrank into the distance, wrapped in yellow tape and guarded by uniforms. Soon it would just be another line in my report. But I knew the real battlefield was already somewhere else, inside my own head. I got home when the sun was already high, but the light pouring through the windows didn't warm a thing. I dropped my vest and gun on the kitchen table and stood there, staring at them, like they were relics from a life that was starting to feel far away. I'd always believed my job was simple. Identify evil, confront it, put it in cuffs. But that night, Marcus showed me that evil isn't always a shadow in an alley or a gun pointed at your head. Sometimes it's sitting right across the table, wearing the face of an ally. Sometimes it's the silence of someone you thought you knew. I spent hours pacing the house, replaying every second. The ambush, the warehouse, the hostages, the countdown, the controlled blast, and above all, the conversation with Jax. I wanted so badly to believe him, to believe the story about being deep undercover, about working from the inside to dismantle Marcus's network, but part of me knew things are never that clean. Deep down, it doesn't matter if Jax is innocent or not. What matters is that Marcus planted the seed of doubt, and it will grow. That's his greatest victory so far. My father used to say the badge weighs more on your conscience than on your shoulders. I never fully understood that until now. Wearing it isn't just about following the law, it's about deciding what to do when the law can't get there in time. It's about living with the truth that even when you do everything right, you can still lose. And worse, sometimes you have to choose to lose in the short term just to win in the long run. That changes how you see everything. I sat in the living room chair, pulled up my phone, and scrolled until I found the number I'd hovered over in the warehouse. The FBI agent who owed me a favor. This time I called. Not to send them after Marcus, but to start something bigger. I wanted it all. Records, movements, connections, any lead tying him to people on the inside. The hunt was no longer just for one man, it was for the entire web. Before hanging up, the agent asked, "How urgent is this?" I thought for a moment. It's not about urgency, it's about time. He thinks he has all the time in the world. I'm going to make him believe that until it's too late. When I set the phone down, an odd calm came over me. Not because anything had been solved, but because I'd finally accepted this wouldn't be a sprint. It would be a war of attrition, and I was willing to fight it. The lesson from that night wasn't about bravery or skill. It was about control. Not just control over a scene, but over yourself. Marcus wanted me to act in anger, to chase him straight into whatever he had set up next, to burn myself out proving I was still the same unshakable cop I used to be. If I'd done that, I would have lost. Not just the case, but myself. Now I understand that winning isn't only about catching the enemy, it's about surviving them, about refusing to let them twist you into the thing you swore to fight. I might be willing to be cold, calculated, and patient, but never to the point of becoming him. That line, thin as it is the only thing keeping me on my side of the badge. I stood, holstered my gun, and stepped out the door. The game had officially begun, and this time I wasn't going into the hunt in a rush. I was going in with a plan. Marcus thinks he knows me. Maybe he does. But he hasn't seen what happens when I decide to play to the very end. And for those listening to this story, hear this. Don't fool yourself into thinking evil always announces itself with violence or threats. Sometimes it comes with a smile, with a calm voice, or in the eyes of someone you trust. And when that moment comes, it won't be your weapon that decides who wins. It'll be your ability to keep them from turning you into what you swore to destroy. So, if you've made it this far, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, and tell me, at which point in this story would you have done things differently? I want to know, how far would you go to win?